objections, part of sales, right? Part of the job description. I think most salespeople are terrified of this. I don't think it's something that you need to be terrified of. I think you just see it as part of the process. It's just the conversation is continuing as you try to look for an answer for them. As you try to figure out if there's an answer for them, if there's an answer that works for them, right? So I want to look at a number of different types of objections because I think this will be helpful as you'll see all these different types and sort of how to approach this whole topic so that no matter what objections you get, whenever you get in that situation where they didn't say yes the first time you asked for the sale, these are a number of things to help you to understand what's happening there and how to handle it the best way possible. So I think the first point to make is handling the objection that's not an objection. I'll say not really an objection. What do I mean by that? So sometimes, let's say with homes, right? Let's say that you're showing homes and there's this home you're showing and they like it and they're sort of looking at the backyard and they're like, there's no room for a pool in this backyard. And then you might just start freaking out, right? Because you're like, oh my gosh, like I have to sell in this house. It's the only one I've got. They've got to buy this, or this is the only one that works for them, or the only one in their price point, or whatever. And you just start having this meltdown. You're like, oh, okay, well, we could look at others, right? But maybe they say, this home can't fit a pool in the backyard. So in that moment, you just want to clarify if that's even an issue in the first place, because sometimes the customer says something that is almost just sort of a throwout. It's almost just more of like an observation than it is really a problem. So they might say, looks like you can't fit a pool in this backyard. And so I would ask, is that something that's important to you? It's like, is that something that's important to you? And they're like, no, not really. Now, sometimes they might be lying, but a lot of times it might just be like an observation, So sometimes someone will throw something out and it's an observation. Maybe it's a tiny issue, but it's not really an issue that affects their decision. Like, oh, this doesn't have that. So always be willing to ask if that's important to them, because a lot of times you can sort of just move past that by qualifying that. Now, if it is important, you're gonna have to come up with some sort of an answer, but be willing to check, because sometimes it's not, and you just kind of dodge that bullet by just asking another question. So not really an objection. There's another variant on this one, is that something that they sort of thought was an objection, but it's not. So let's say with homes, right? Maybe there's somebody that says, I need to have 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, but you've only got something with 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, but you've only got something with 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, let's say. So you're missing a bedroom, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, no, what am I gonna do, right? I'm missing a bedroom, I guess we can't do this one, right? But be willing to ask him, figure out, okay, well, how are you gonna use each of these bedrooms? Why is it 4 bedrooms? How will each one be used? Okay, these 3 are for the kids, and then you wanted a playroom. Okay, so you need space for the kids to play. Okay, cool. Maybe that home has a landing. You're like, okay, well, could this landing be a place for the kids to play? Yes, it could. Okay, cool. So we're good, moving on, right? So sometimes they've thought of something in their head as an objection, but maybe you do have an answer for that, And so sometimes just clarifying why is it that they say they need that, understanding why it is that they need that, and maybe this current solution that you've come up with can still work, or some tweaked version that you could easily do could still work, right? So that's another little helpful way to understand how some of these objections can happen. Sometimes you'll get some interesting price objections. Now there's a number of different price objections. I don't know how much I will get into or not. Let's just see how this goes. But for this one in particular, sometimes people, let's say with getting a house, they're like, it's gotta be 250K, or it can't be over 250K. And then you say okay, what's important about that number? How did you get to that number? Well, a lot of times it's that they went on Zillow and they put in all these numbers and well, it's because I need to be at X amount per month. It's okay, if we found you something, so it's okay, so you're saying that if we found you something for that amount per month, that's really what you mean, that's what you'd be looking for. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. It's like, okay, cool. So now that just changed the game, right? Maybe they can have something more and they could just put more down or whatever. Now you've got more room to play with, right? So sometimes people will think something is an issue with the price, but they might not really, you might be misunderstanding why they're saying that. You might be thinking, oh, well, they can't have anything above that price, but they might be thinking, well, really it's the monthly payment. So now you're playing a different game, right? Okay, cool, monthly payment. So that's what we gotta be thinking about, right? And so understanding that, making sure you're solving the problem that they're wanting solved in the way that they're wanting it solved, it all of a sudden gives you flexibility to figure things out better because now you understand what they mean. I'll briefly address the price objection again. You guys have probably heard this before. You know, people say things, the price objection is not really a price objection, it's a value objection, meaning we don't really see how this is worth it. We don't see how we're getting more than we're giving, right? If we think that we're giving more than we're getting in return, or than other people are going to give us in return, then, you know, we don't think that's a very good deal, and then the price sounds very high. But if we feel like we're getting way more than we're giving, or way more than other people would give us, you know, custom to what our needs are, then we're going to be happy. So, you know, the price objection is basically just saying, I don't see how this is worth it, you know, based on what you've explained to me so far. And, you know, you might want to go into why that is. Like, so tell me what you mean. Like, which part do you think was, what makes you feel that way? Like, is there like somebody else who you felt was offering more, or, you know, is there, you know, sometimes you can just sort of ask what it is that they mean. I think that with all objections, it's really a matter of understanding what it is exactly that is their concern. The more in detail you understand exactly what their concern is, the more effectively you can go about solving it. So you do need to be willing to ask those sort of uncomfortable questions, like, okay, like, tell me about that. Like, what part of what makes you feel that the price seems high, you know? And a lot of times people explain, like, well, I just feel like this person over here is offering granite and you guys aren't. And it's like, oh, okay, so if we could offer granite, do you think that the price, that this would seem reasonable and you move forward? Like, oh yeah, well, if you guys could offer granite, like, okay, let's put in an offer and let's see if we could get granite. And then would you say yes? Oh, I would definitely say yes. So all of a sudden that was solved, right? So guys, you don't need to be so scared of the objections. It's just a continuing of the conversation. It's basically just saying that as of this moment right now, up until this point, I'm not quite convinced enough yet that this is the right fit for me that I'm ready to buy right now, right? It doesn't mean no forever. It doesn't even mean no, we're not gonna buy today. It just means like there are some unresolved things. There's some things that we still haven't hit that are important to them that are in the way. So like I said, the better job we did everything up until this point, the easier it's gonna be. The more you just totally missed everything, the harder it's gonna be. But usually there's always gonna be some objections, but try not to be too scared of it. Try to really like narrow in on exactly what it is that they mean and what they're saying and what really the issue is for them. And then you just go about trying to find an answer to that. And, you know, if you're able to find good, adequate, hopefully great answers to the things that their concerns are, then hopefully you get to the end and you make things happen. So this is a big difference between really good salespeople and not as good salespeople. Is the not as good ones, they get one rejection in the beginning and they kind of fall apart and they're like, oh, this is impossible, I thought this was so good. But you know, you sort of have to be willing to keep going, keep answering all their questions, keep solving all their problems. It's sort of, this is just sort of the continuation of problem solving. Salespeople were problem solvers, and you know, the best problem solvers are going to be the people that get paid the most. And there's usually going to be objections, and you have to be able to continue to solve problems for your customer until you find them what they're looking for. I think another thing just to go back to as well is the client with the million must-haves, right? We're like, I need this and I need this and I need, it's like, I need, you know, a sports car and I need 2 doors and I need this and it needs to be 1,000 horsepower and it needs to be $40,000 or less and it's got to be 2023 and it's got to be the sports package. It's like, okay, none of that exists, right? So don't be overwhelmed when someone starts being that way. You just go back to, okay, what are the 2 or 3 most important things? Like, let me just make sure that I understand. Okay, let's work on getting these for you. And usually, you're the expert, you keep in control of things. Usually they're gonna be good with that. And guys, if they're not, if they're like, no, like it has to be all these days or I don't ever wanna talk to you again. It's like, okay, not a good prospect, right? So again, this isn't about getting everybody to do everything, because not everybody's a prospect. So that's just not possible, no matter how persuasive you are, unless you're just like lying and being highly unethical. Then you could maybe get a couple more, but I think you'll also gonna have a lot of people pissed off at you, and I don't think it's sustainable. And I actually think people can feel that and don't like that, and I think you pay a price for it. So I definitely don't advocate, always do the right thing, always say what is true and honest. And not everybody's a prospect, and that's okay. But for the most part, when you get those people with a million must-haves, you can break it down and you can take them back to planet Earth. There are 2 or 3 things. Okay, we're gonna knock those out for you. If we find those for you, does that work? Yeah, I guess so. It's like, okay, cool. Let's talk about what everybody probably wants to know about, which is the objection, I need to think about it. And actually, I'm gonna erase this real quick. So I need to think about it as sort of just a general objection, and it's a little bit tricky for a number of reasons. I think it's tricky because, you don't really know where you went wrong, because it's such a vague objection, right? It could sort of be about anything, but you can kind of know that somewhere along the line, there was a break where you thought things were good and they didn't think so. There was something that you didn't fully solve. So the more thorough job we do, hopefully we don't get to this, but if we do get to it, it usually means there were things we did wrong before. Not always, but usually. I think one of the things that can be helpful here, whenever you get, I need to think about it, it's a little tricky because you're gonna need to backtrack a little bit, because you lost them somewhere. So you're gonna have to sort of go back and get them wherever you lost them, and then keep them moving forward again. So if they need to think about it, sometimes you can toss something else out. You'd be like, oh, okay, like I understand. There's a number of things you could say. You could be like, what part is it that you feel you need to think about more? Or like, okay, I understand. Like, is it because of the price? Is the price is the reason that you're not so sure if it's the right fit? Because they're saying they're not so sure if it's the right fit, right? If they're saying I need to think about it, they're saying they're not so sure it's the right fit. So sometimes you can toss something like that out. Is the price, or and sometimes they'll say, yeah, like it's the price, or they'll say it's not, and you're like, okay, well, I know you were saying, you could sort of go back into the summary close, like I know you're saying that this was right, and this was right, and this was right, and this was right. Which part was it that you're not sure about, that we can try to figure out for you or make better for you? It's really sort of like any objection, in the sense that you're sort of just trying to figure out where it is that you lost them, and then see if there's an answer you can come up with for them that does work, right? I think something that is worth sharing here too is, do you let them think about it? That's a good question, right? I want to share a little bit of my story with this. So I used to let people think about it. Right? So when I first got into new home sales, people would always tell me that they needed to think about it. And this was before I kind of got good at it. And, in my head, I was like, okay, that's totally reasonable. I would need to think about it, big purchase. You can't just make a purchase on the first day with something like a house, gotta go see some other things. And, I could totally understand. Oh, definitely a week from now works great. Yeah, we'll see you next Sunday, go think about it, and it makes sense, it makes sense. And I would tell myself, oh, well, if I was in their situation, I would need to think about it too. So, it's the right thing to do morally to let them think about it. And that was something that I sort of struggled with, because I was like, well, what's wrong with thinking about it? If it's the right fit for them, then, they will do it. And if it's not the right fit for them, then they won't. And And as I had more and more time in sales, the higher ticket like houses, and I sort of was able to observe human behavior now more and how we make decisions, what makes us decide things, what makes us not, just how do human beings go about making these decisions, you know? Is it helpful for us to think about it? Is it not? It's an interesting question, right? Sort of the assumption is that it is helpful to think about it. And if it is, if it's the right thing by the customer for them to think about it, then yes, the salesperson, maybe they're being pushy, maybe they shouldn't do that, maybe that's not cool. And some salespeople really are a little much with the way they go about things. But I want to show you something of what my thoughts are with this. All right, I'll explain what I just did here. So this is my experience from the 11 years that I've been in sales. I've sold a lot of different things, lower and higher ticket things. And this is what I find. The first day, the person's there, they're by far the most likely to make a decision. By far, like not even close, right? And by the 24-hour mark, if they decide within the first 24 hours, there's still some hope that they will decide, that they will still say yes. After the 24-hour mark, it's like another massive drop-off. At the 1 week mark, it's extremely low. At the 1 month mark, extremely, extremely low, and kind of keeps going out to almost zero. So this is just what I find of how human beings make these decisions. I find that if they don't do it that day, they almost never will. If they don't do it within 24 hours, they really, like I would say less than 10% chance if they go past this point. Maybe less than 5%, less than 10, I don't know. 5 to 10%. If it doesn't happen within the first 24 hours, it pretty much never happens. So, a couple thoughts on this. Let's assume that the buyer prospect has a problem, right? Because products and services are just solutions to problems, right? So, they've got a certain problem, and let's assume that that problem has to be solved. Let's take something like a dating coach. Or no, let's say like a marriage counselor. Marriage counselor, right? Problems they solve, help people figure out their marriage, right? Important. So let's say the customer has a problem, right? Our marriage is a wreck, it's about to fall apart, we don't know what to do, we need help, we need help. And let's say that they meet with that marriage counselor, and the marriage counselor figures out, yeah, based on everything you said, I think I can help you. And they think, yeah, based on everything he or she is saying, I think they can help us too, right? So there's a problem, and the problem is severe. The problem's gotta be solved. Like, they've got kids, their marriage is falling apart, their life is a mess, gotta be solved. There's a good answer. Let's say this marriage counselor is the best in the city, right? They're awesome, they're great, they're gonna be able to help, right? So let's assume, because if you're an ethical person, which I'm hoping you are, if you're an ethical person and you've gone through your consultative selling, let's just assume that that person has a severe issue, because hopefully what you're solving is the answer to something that's a severe issue. They've got a severe issue, and you are the right answer. We're assuming that you've established that. Now, if this isn't good for their life, then I'm not advocating that you close people and force people to do things that are not good for their life, right? But we're assuming these. Huge problem, marriage falling apart. Answer, best person, he, she, whoever they are, can definitely help, right? So then we're getting to the point of like, okay, so this is the right thing for them to do, is what it looks like. So then the question is, what is your role as the marriage counselor, and how do human beings actually make decisions, right? So your role as a marriage counselor is to help them to do the right thing for them, and their role is also to try to get them to do the right thing for them, but human beings make decisions in kind of weird ways. So human beings, here's the couple, they think that thinking about it is good because they're gonna roll it over their head, and thinking about it's a better way to come to it. Like we sort of, as a society, we sort of think that better to think through things and then make a decision. What I find is it's not quite how we work. What I find is that when they're here, they've sort of got their emotions and they've got logic. Maybe a little more emotions, but they've got emotion and logic, where they're pretty clear on the product or service or whatever. Now, sometimes people don't want to make an emotional decision, and I support that. I support that. And when people are giving me a really hard time, or they're just like, I really don't want to decide in the moment, sometimes I say like, okay, sometimes what I will do, because that's fair, I respect that, is I will say, and I would even tell my customers when they say they wanted to think about it, that I would explain all this to them, and I would explain what I see is that, when people make a decision, it's usually that same day, and if not then, definitely within 24 hours. And then what I would find is that after that, they just tend not to. And I think it's because when you get past the 24-hour mark, really when you start to get past this part, but definitely within 24 hours, you start to get analysis paralysis. You get analysis paralysis, and you sort of just start freaking out, when you were here, everything was so clear, and maybe within 24 hours, sometimes people really do just need to sleep on it, and they're gonna come back and buy it the next day. And you still don't really wanna let those people go, but if you've tried and you've done everything and you have to, have your worst case scenario backup plan be, okay, well, I understand you gotta go sleep on it, maybe it's 5 p.m. that day, hey, does 11 a.m. tomorrow for the contract, does that work? Yes, that works. And then you have your answer, right? But they get analysis paralysis. It's like those 24 hours goes by and everything just sort of gets all crazy in their head, and they just can't think, and they sort of freak out, oh my God, what if I make the wrong decision? What if this isn't right? I should go see 1,000 more things. Oh my gosh, I don't know. So in this example, maybe these people say they want to think about it, right? And let's say the marriage counselor, maybe she's not a great salesperson. She's like, okay, whatever, go think about it. And they're like, well, we'll get back to you in a week or two, right? And, they're so analysis paralysis in this week or two that, this might have really been the right thing for them, and they really need that, and it really would have saved their marriage. But, they sort of got analysis paralysis, and they kind of overthought it and never really did anything. And who knows, maybe now they end up divorced and their kids end up miserable and blah, 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 right? So assuming they've got that problem, assuming it has to be solved, assuming you've got an answer, which we're assuming you do, then this is helpful to understand that human beings make decisions this way. It's helpful to know that if they don't decide here, it's almost guaranteed they won't. If they don't decide within 24 hours, the drop is already massive, but after 24 hours, extremely unlikely. And then it, continues to drop off more after 1 week, after 1 month. But it's, people say, oh, follow up. It's like, yeah, follow up, but you know what? I do follow up, and people tend to make decisions or not. This is what I find. So why do I share all this? I share all this because when people would start telling me I need to think about it, for one, I'm trying to make sure I understand why that is, and make sure that we have gone over everything properly, right? But I would also explain this to them. I'd explain this to my customers, and I'd say, you know what, I totally understand, and I used to let people go and think about it. It really made a lot of sense to me to do that. But what I found is that I found this distribution. I found that anybody who decides, they decide then, and sometimes they need within 24 hours and they decide, and after that, it's almost guaranteed they won't. And so if this is the right fit, and this problem has to be solved, and this is the answer to the problem, then I would encourage you to move forward. And that, again, it's like that part right there, right? Where we're needing to kind of cross that chasm. So you're really needing to be strong and have a lot of certainty to help them pass that, because they're scared. It's almost like a parent and a child, you know? It's like, hey, it's gonna be okay. Like, we could cross this thing. You're gonna be all right. We're gonna make it, you know? So understanding that this tends to be how human beings make these decisions is helpful. Because if it wasn't, if this helps them to make a decision, to think about it a lot, now you could say, well, Justin, you know, they didn't come back, that just means it wasn't the right fit. I think sometimes that's true. Sometimes they didn't come back because it's not the right fit. But I think sometimes it was, and sometimes they just overthought it too much. And I think this is something that human beings really, really, really tend to do, is we get stuck in our head and then we just sort of can't make a decision. And sometimes that's not good. So if someone says I need to think about it, understand that these are the things that it means. It means that something wasn't solved up to this point. It means you got to go backwards and figure out what that was. Was that price? Like, I know we talked about this, you know, which was the part that you're not sure about, that we still need to work on or figure out or whatever. And then if they're just really like, no, I just really need to think about it, you can ask them, like, do you feel like this is really the perfect fit and money's right, everything's right, but you just, you know, don't want to make the decision right now? And, you know, you try and you try, but like I said, if you can't get them to make the decision then, definitely within 24 hours, and you could explain to them, this is what I see of how people make decisions, and if you really feel like it's the right fit for you, you know, okay, I understand you need to sleep on it. You know, you don't want to make an emotional, rational decision. It's 5 p.m. now, you know, get dinner, get some sleep, get some rest, come back. We can do the contract tomorrow at 10 a.m. Like, does that work for you? Yeah, that works for me. And look, sometimes those people will not come. You still don't really want to let them go, but sometimes you don't have a choice. But if they're like, I really just don't want to make an emotional decision, you know, you could still kind of try to push past that too. But you can have this as a backup plan. You could be like, do the 24-hour thing. And that way you'll at least still get some that you wouldn't have gotten, because they haven't really gone into analysis paralysis yet. They can still sort of make a decision within that time, is what I find. So that's how to handle that. That's what to do if you get into that situation. This is something that is worth sometimes explaining to the customer, because if it really is the right fit for them and they really do want to do it, then sometimes, you know, you can explain things in a way where it's like, this is what I find of what people usually do. And, you know, if this is the right fit for you, then I would really encourage you to move forward. You know, does that work for you? And then you stop again and you let them answer, right? So being willing to explain stuff and then ask for the sale again and stop and let them answer. So that's that's handling objections. Overall summary, it's basically, you know, the conversation's still continuing. It's not a hard no forever. It's not even a hard no for that day. It just means that there's some things that you still have to figure out, and you're continuing to be an expert problem solver and leading them through everything and helping them to figure out whatever still needs you guys' attention. So moving on to the next thing.